Welcome. Hey, my name's Pete, and I am obligated to begin every talk with "I'm excited to be here." It's actually written in the Bible somewhere. I'm excited to be here. I don't know what else to say. That's the problem. We don't know what else to say. I am interested, though, this morning to get a chance to share on a really deep topic. You heard DJ's voice on that video, but you actually kind of heard my story a little bit. That was kind of me. Grew up in a Christian home and went to college and kind of lost belief a little bit. But I want to talk about that this week and next week as well. So let me start here. This week something interesting happened. One of the most world-famous scientists of our generation who passed away this year, Stephen Hawking, actually spoke to us from the grave this week. It is Halloween. But his family released a book that he was working on before he died. And the book is basically just him answering random questions in a collection of essays. And of course, there's a lot of stuff about the universe and black holes, his expertise. But the big headline, literally, it was a headline, was Stephen Hawking finally admits he doesn't believe in God. And I saw it, and I'm like, well, all right, let's go home. Stephen Hawking, he doesn't believe in God. I mean, seriously, you would have thought from the comments section, I saw it on Facebook, that the argument was over, and that anyone still holding on to this silly science-denying backwater country bumpkin nonsense is just denying the truth. How can anyone continue to believe in God when a scientist tells me that he doesn't? I mean, come on, people, he's a scientist. He knows things. DNA, physics, flux capacitors, all that crap you hated in school, right? Come on, listen to him. And sometimes it's so interesting. I felt sad reading the comment section. I did like, though, I think Rebecca or somebody actually posted the deal breaker thing in the comment section, like, come to Rise. There you go. But I felt sad. He's just briefly reading these people fighting and arguing, and it's like it's this war that exists, this epic cage match between God and the evil, insidious science, and they're constantly fighting, and we're drawing up battle lines across the internet where we're communicating to the world and each other that you have to pick. It's one or the other. You either follow in line with Hawking and others and say that I believe in science, so there's no God, or I'm a Christian and I follow Jesus, so sorry, science. And with the continued advancement of science, and it's just rapidly speeding up, evolutionary theory, human genome mapping, astrophysics, the divide is just widening. And more it feels like you're forced to choose. Either follow Jesus, which apparently means like turning off my brain, rejecting logic, and just going with the crowd, or I say, no, I'm sorry, Jesus, but I can't do that. I have to accept what seems reasonable to me, and therefore I just won't be a person of faith. And that to me is just sad, right? That we're communicating that science means all of that faith stuff is just this antiquated, modern world has moved on from that. And it's created this tension, this fighting between those who are like, no, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus, I'm going to follow him, and those who are like, I just believe in science. And one of the clearest pictures of that tension for me is in this short video clip I'd like to show you that I think just really...
I'm a little concerned right now about your salvation and stuff. How come you have not been baptized?
Because I never got around to it, okay? I don't know why you always have to be judging me. Because I only believe in science.
But tonight, we are going up against Satan's caveman. And I just thought it would be a good idea if you...
I found it very impressive that we baptized 199 people in these years, but I told Brandon we could triple that number in a week following that model. I believe in science, right? Like, I don't know, for some reason I always laugh at that. Maybe I kind of resonated with it. This morning we're continuing this series we started called Deal Breakers. And essentially what we're asking are, what are the things that for people, maybe you would say, the whole Jesus thing sounds cool, but this issue is just a deal breaker. I'm sorry, I can't get over it. And it's been my experience that for a lot of people, this issue of science, and even sort of pushing that into the whole idea of sort of reason and logic in general, is often a deal breaker. And so I want to just talk about it this morning. Is it true that science, should it be a deal breaker? Is that even a reasonable thing to say? Or have we kind of made the water so muddy we've missed the point here? So we're going to talk about it this morning. We're also going to talk about it again next week. So there's some of it I won't be able to finish today, and I'm going to pick up again next Sunday. But I want to talk about what I think is really just kind of an illusion. This picture, this idea that, I believe in science, sorry. I don't think it's actually a good excuse, and I want to talk about why. My hope is to possibly bring down some of the walls that we've built up on both sides. I will admit right from the beginning that some of you are sitting in this room like, oh, not school, crap. I get it. And some of you are really interested. That's kind of the nature of a topic like this. Maybe, though, if you're a person who's like, I don't really have any scientific objections, this might be a good morning for you just to think through, what about the people that you know that do? Do you have the ability to communicate to them and talk to them about it, to defend how you think and feel about your faith? So maybe, if nothing else, you can pull some from that this morning. All right, let me pray for us, and we're just going to jump straight in. God, this morning we just ask that you would speak to us. We ask that this really kind of heavy topic, Lord, that you would open our eyes and ears and hearts and minds to hear the truth of who you are, and bring down walls that keep people from you. We pray that anything that would keep someone from finding this amazing life in you and with you, that truth would overcome that. We just pray for that this morning. All right, amen. Okay, you guys good? You ready? All right, let's jump in. Is it true? Are science and belief somehow opposed to each other? Are they in conflict? Do you have to pick one or the other? Are they opposites? And I would contend, obviously, this morning that no, I don't think they are. Now, what I'm not going to do this morning, just so we're clear, I'm not going to talk about why I think science proves God. I don't think it does, but some do, and that's okay, but I'm not going that direction. What I want to do, though, is I want to address the deal breaker issue. Is science a deal breaker? And my argument is no, it's not. And so that's kind of where I'm going this morning. And the reason why I believe that is because science and religion are different. And it's their differences that we need to talk about and understand in order to understand this is why they're not in conflict. So first, let's just set the ground rules here. What is science? What are we talking about when we say science? What is it? The most fundamental thing that we need to keep in mind when we talk about science, and you talk to any scientist, Christian, non-Christian, doesn't matter, they will agree with this statement. Science is concerned with what we call nature. Nature is the physical, not nature like the birds, but yeah, the birds, but nature is everything. It's everything, the universe, everything that's physical, everything that you can test and touch and see and taste, everything you can measure, all the things that you can prove, the things that you can draw data from, right? Nature is our physical world within which we exist. And this activity of engaging it, of studying it, of looking at it, of asking questions, of testing it, right? This is what we call science. It is simply the activity, the process of looking around at our physical world and being like, oh, how does that work, right? It's saying like, oh, if I drop this, it falls. Why does it fall? Let's talk about that, right? That's science. That's what it is. It's interested in nature, and it does so by asking the question of how. How does that work? How did that fall, right? What process made that fall? Why is it that when I throw things up, they always come down? Why does it look like the sun is rising in the sky? Why does that plant grow? Why do we grow? Why do we die, right? All these kind of questions. How does this work? Explain it to me. That's what science does. And it does so by experimenting, by measuring, by looking and testing, right? It tells us to believe in gravity because we can test it, we can prove it. We can drop something and watch it fall. That's what science is. It's what it does. But this is the important thing that we need to grasp with. There is a fundamental boundary around science. There's a wall that it can't go past. And that wall is the key. That difference is the key. Because there are questions in our existence that are beyond science's walls. Questions like, why do we exist? Is God real? There are things that are actually outside of, above, beyond the natural nature. The Greeks use their word supra, which literally means above it or beyond it. Supra-nature is something that is outside of or beyond the physical, the natural. So the word that you might be, or Halloween, right? Supernatural, go su. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that would be talking about something that's outside of the physical, the natural world. But supra-nature just means it's something I can't test. It's not something I can put in a beaker and examine. And life is full of these things, full of these questions that are outside the terrain of science. And we need a different perspective. Let me give you an example. It's kind of a crude one, but here it is. Science can explain how a high-speed metal object can be projected through the barrel of a gun after a combustible explosion forces kinetic energy, sending it into the chest cavity of a human being, rupturing the heart, and bringing about organ failure leading to death. Science can explain all of that. It can explain the physics of the bullet. It can explain the anatomy of why blood flow has to happen to the brain for your body to continue to function. Is murder wrong? Well, why? Give me the scientific reason why murder is wrong. Test it in a beaker. You can't. Why did that person pull the trigger? What was their motive? What would lead a person to do that? What happens to that person after their heart stops beating? Is that it? Well, I don't know. Why don't you know? Well, because science can't tell me. True. Does that mean that there's nothing beyond life? Because science can't tell you, does that mean it's the end? That's kind of an assumption, isn't it? And this is what I'm talking about, the differences between science and supernatural. I'm studying nature, and there are other things beyond nature. This doesn't mean science is opposed to what is above or outside of nature, only that you need a different tool. It's no longer relevant for the task at hand once I leave nature, because such things are not measurable. You can't examine them. One of the most famous scientists next to Stephen Hawking of the last century was a man named Stephen Jay Gould, not to be confused with Jan Levison Gould, if you're an Office fan. So Stephen Jay Gould said this. He said, "Science can work only with naturalistic explanations." And just to clarify, Stephen Jay Gould was not a Christian. He did not believe in God. He wasn't like a harsh atheist, but he's like, no, I don't believe in that stuff. But he was one of the most pioneering evolutionary biologists of the last century. Science can only work with natural things. It can neither affirm nor deny anything outside, like God. Scientists simply cannot comment on it. So here's Stephen Jay Gould actually writing this about other atheists who are making the claim, science disproves God. Stephen Jay Gould, who's not a Christian, was like, no, it doesn't. You can't, as a scientist, you have no reason to comment on God. It's outside of science. Why are you even talking about it? That was his argument. There's some questions science is built to answer, and we should let it. But there are other thoughts, other truths that it's incapable of dealing with. And this is where religion comes in. This is where faith, this is where belief in God comes in. This is where being open to the idea that something might exist beyond nature takes place. Now, this also doesn't mean that religion is opposed to science. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would it be opposed? Both religion and science are a search for truth. But they search in different realms. They search in different areas, right? Science says, I want to know the truth about gravity. Religion says, I want to know the truth about my existence. Science says, I want to know the truth about physics. Religion says, I want to know the truth about what is beyond physics, metaphysics. They both want to know truth, but they're different things. Let me give you a kind of an analogy here. If I were to ask you a question, hypothetically, you're going on a trip, which is better, to drive a car or to take an airplane? How could you even answer that? Where are you going? Are you picking up your daughter from school? Or are you going to Europe? Right? Like, where do you need to go? A car is a great way to get around in your day-to-day life. But if you're planning a trip to Europe, unless your Prius hybrid floats, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Some journeys require you need to get off the ground a little bit and get up higher. But this doesn't make planes and cars opposed to each other. No one says, well, now that we've mastered the miracle of flight, cars are stupid. Yeah, like my daughter's kindergarten parking lot is already a mess. Good luck landing a 747 there tomorrow. It depends on the trip. You don't oppose one to use the other. That's nonsense. Saying you don't believe in God because you believe in science is kind of like saying, I don't believe in flying because I own a car. What? Those don't connect. They're not. You can do both, right? When you're going across town, jump in the car. If you need to get to Europe, take a plane. Like, it's not one or the other for your life. You don't need to oppose one to use the other. Just because you're driving your car, I hate airplanes. What are you talking about? That's nonsense. And yet we do that with science and faith. Why can't both be a part of my life in different areas of my life? Why do they have to be conflicting? Why do I have to choose? You don't. So yes, Stephen Hawking was a brilliant scientist whose opinion carries weight within science, right? But just because my mechanic knows everything about my muffler doesn't mean I want to take his parenting advice. Actually, Dave and Connie Bennett are my mechanic, and they probably are good parents. But the point is still true. Like, the area of expertise is limited to the field. Science and belief in God are not opposed. They're just different fields. They're different things. They cover different terrain. Being an expert in one doesn't mean you know everything about the other. Assuming that someone's, because they know a lot about science, they know everything about God, it's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything. If you want to know how a volcano works, talk to a scientist. If you want to know whether or not you should throw a virgin into the volcano, you've left science and you're now talking about something else. Don't, by the way. I answered it for you. So believe Hawking if you want, right? But don't do it because he's a scientist. In fact, Hawking even said, if you read more onto it, he doesn't say, I don't believe in God because of science. He actually says what's behind his belief is that he spent his entire adult life disabled in a wheelchair, and he questioned why a God would allow that to happen. That is not a scientific issue. It is an interesting, profound, deep issue, which we actually will be covering in this Deal Baker series in a few weeks. But it's not a science issue. Hawking never denied God because of his study of black holes. The two have nothing to do with each other. He actually made multiple comments throughout his career that he would come to places and say, like, maybe there is a God here. It's simply not true that to believe God requires you to deny science, or that to be committed to science means you have to reject faith. It isn't true. But why do we think that then? Okay, Pete, so you've stated your case. Why are you even talking about it? Because clearly so many people do believe that. What has led to this confusion? I want to give you three things, three claims or belief statements that people have and that they say out loud and they talk about that I think have brought about much of the confusion and created this tension. And I think as we unpack them and show them to be what they are, a lot of it kind of goes away. Can I also ask the guys in the back to put the clock on the TV, because I want to make sure I don't talk till 11 o'clock. Sorry. I'll do it. I will. So let's talk about three claims, three beliefs that I think are myths that will lead to us misunderstanding this. The first one is this. Here is a claim, a statement people make. You should only believe what science can prove. Statement number one. You should only believe something if it's provable. And at the heart of this, there's some logic. It's like, look, don't believe dumb stuff. Believe stuff you can prove. Like, don't just believe in nonsensical fairy tales. That's kind of where it's coming from. I get that. This idea is known as scientific materialism, and you'll be tested on that later. It's this view that is actually held by most sort of staunch atheists. They argue that belief should only be based on evidence. Prove it to me, and then I'll believe it. However, you cannot prove God exists. You can't give me any evidence for it. So it's silly nonsense to believe in it. You might as well believe in a flying spaghetti monster. Don't believe in God because you can't prove it. You kind of hear that and you're like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And therefore it sort of perpetuates this myth that science is anti-God. Like science is against God because God's not provable. Here's the problem. And it's actually right here in this statement. And some of you guys, this is going to make your eyes cross, but just hold on for a second. Bear with me. Just read that for a second. You should only believe what science can prove. Is that true? Prove it. Prove to me that I should only believe what is provable. Because you can't. That statement is a faith statement. That is a belief statement completely unfounded on any objective, evidential issue. There's nothing supporting that statement other than you randomly saying it. So, if I start believing that for no other reason than I choose to believe it, or it sounds nice, well, of course, the rest of the trajectory of my life is going to be built on that statement. I'm going to reject God completely, and I'm only going to believe in science because I believe that I should only believe what I believe that science can prove. I have just walked in a circle, and I've contradicted myself because my belief is not based on science. It's just based on my opinion. The whole thing just unravels like pulling a thread out of a sweater. It's like, where did this all go? Where is the empirical evidence for this statement? It doesn't exist. And there are so many things in life that you believe that you can't prove. How could you possibly think that's true? Science can't prove the meaning of your life. It can't prove what kind of music you like. Give me some type of scientific evidence that you love your children. Prove in science that something is right or wrong. How can science tell you whether you should or shouldn't cheat on your taxes? Right? There's so many things you believe that you can't prove. This statement is nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. Who mandated this? God? Well, no, because I don't believe in God. We're all just an accident floating through space. Why is this true? It's not. Which brings us to the heart of scientific materialism. This whole thing is really just about using science to affirm and back up what I already believe. People who say things like, I reject God because of science, are just using science because they already reject God. They started with the point of science just proves God because you can't prove God. So no, you started believing there's no God, and then you said, because I believe that, I'm going to say science just, it doesn't. You've just started that point. Why did you start at that point? Are you like Hawking, who actually started that point because of suffering and evil in his life, and then he went to science? A lot of people are like that. I'm not an expert on this, but I have read a lot of the modern kind of most popular militant atheist people out there like Richard Dawkins and others who love to use science to talk about why there's no God. Almost all of them, you trace back their history. There's things in their life like abuse and mistreatment from Christians that led to a belief that God isn't real, and that turned into, so science proves, no, it doesn't. They're different things. And I'm not saying that all people who lack faith are disingenuous or liars. There are plenty of wonderful men and women who just don't believe in God, but don't see a reason to put forward this nonsense that you have to prove everything you believe. I've actually seen a lot of atheists who just kind of laugh at the idea. That's silly. So we believe in things all the time that we can't measure, that we can't prove. That's a myth. It's just a myth. There's no way to live your life. Okay, so let me move on to the second one, which is a bit, I think, more, for me, this is the bigger one. I deal with this one. Science is about nature. It's about examining how things work. It's about reasonably looking at it and saying, it happened because of this, and this makes sense. But Christians have all these beliefs about miracles and oceans parting and people walking on water and people rising from the dead. It's like all of your miraculous beliefs, they just stand opposed to science, which tells me those things don't happen. So isn't it true that for me to be a Christian, I have to believe in things that are so opposed to science? I believe that's a myth. And this is probably, some of you, you're already falling asleep, and this is going to make it worse. But whatever. Woo, look over here. I do think there are some people that are sitting in this room, though, that probably need to hear this one. Science wants to give natural explanations to events that occur in nature. If I drop something, gravity pulled it down based on the mass of the earth and it's spinning and all, yeah, whatever. And yet so much of Christianity is based on miracles that seem to go against nature. And as a rational thinking person myself, I will be honest, this is a hard one for me. That was my story you heard in the video. Floods, creation, oh, okay, really? But here's what I would say. First, you need to be careful again on your starting point. No one is denying that events which science can't explain are tough to accept. I'm with you on that. But that doesn't make those who believe in them anti-science. Because, and I'll try to, this is kind of a deep philosophical point here, but I'll try to make it real here. When I speak of a miracle happening, it's unusual, it's surprising, it's odd. It's like, oh my goodness, that's why people are surprised, right? But it's not actually a violation of nature. Rather, from a Christian perspective, a miracle is simply an interaction within nature by a supernatural agent who made the Cubs win the World Series. Sorry, it's inappropriate. I don't know why I put that up there. A miracle is an interaction within nature. It's like if you could sort of think of all of nature as like a bubble, right? And everything that happens inside of it is natural. When something weird happens, you're like, well, that's not science. What happens, though, if somebody could reach into the bubble and change something? Are they violating what's inside the bubble? Or here's a dumb analogy, but let's say, again, I were to take this piece of paper and I were to drop it. Everyone in the room would expect it to fall because we believe in the law of gravity. But what if it didn't fall? What if it stopped in midair? Would that be a miracle? Well, it wouldn't be a miracle if somebody was standing right here and grabbed it, right? That wouldn't be a violation of nature. That would just be an explanation of the cause. That guy grabbed it and caught it. But what if I couldn't see that person? What if somebody that I couldn't see grabbed it and stopped it? Is it violating nature? No, it's just someone stepping into nature who you can't currently see. Now, again, I know that's a lot. You're kind of like, wow. But my point isn't, hey, I definitely need you to believe in miracles. My point is you're not actually violating science by believing that God is capable of stepping into nature. And again, part of the issue here is appear. What does it appear? Because Christians do not believe miracles are events that violate natural law. I don't believe that. I believe that miracles are events where God actually steps into nature and does things, that he is the agent, he's the one causing it. He's acting in our world. I know and believe that humans can't walk on water. I believe that dead people stay dead naturally. But what I'm claiming is that I believe God has the ability to step into nature and tinker with it, mess with it. Which means this, the real issue, again, is not whether miracles are anti-science, but is there a God? If there's a God, miracles are just not a big deal. Yeah, God can do whatever he wants. If you start with there being no God, well, then you're just confirming your own bias. If you say there is no God, therefore miracles can't happen, well, you just prove that on your own logic. Francis Collins, who's the head of the Human Genome Project, and actually mapped the entire human body under the Clinton administration, he said this: if one starts with the presumption, like the belief, that the supernatural miracles events are impossible because there's no God, well then yeah, there can be no miracles, because you've already decided that in your brain. But that isn't a scientific claim. Rather, it's a naturalistic anti-God claim which chooses to rule out his involvement from the start. And I know that was kind of deep stuff, but essentially he's saying, if you decide in your own heart that God isn't real or won't do anything in nature, then yes, miracles don't exist. But why did you decide that? Again, what proof or evidence did you have? None, right? It's just your opinion. And so, in a sense, what I'm trying to get there is basically, just because I'm a person of science, I'm a person of logic and reason, doesn't mean I have to deny miracles. I can believe in both. I can be a person who believes in a supernatural God capable of interacting with nature and be completely intellectually satisfied. It doesn't have to be a deal breaker for me. Now, I think sometimes Christians maybe make this worse by claiming everything's a miracle. Oh, my car started, it was God. It's a combustible engine. I mean, sorry. But I still do believe, my entire faith is based upon the belief that a human being was raised from the dead. That's a miracle. But I believe God can do it because I believe in God. So really, that's the catch, isn't it? It's not that science is anti-God. It's just whether or not you believe in God. So if you're feeling held up, if you're saying, I don't know if I can follow God because of science, I would say that's nonsense. The minute you accept God's existence, science just comes along with it. Which brings me to my third point that I want to end on, and I want to pick up next week. I think one of the hardest things for people to accept when it comes to science is based on what Brandon talked about last week a little bit. Just Christians. Just Christians themselves. What about this statement that just Christians themselves, their beliefs are anti-science? Is this true? I'd love to be like, false. Sometimes that is true. But it's not always true. The militant atheist Richard Dawkins, who, man, that dude is just vehemently hates Christians. One of his famous arguments in his book, The God Delusion, was that he said this. He said, religion is evil. Evil? Well, all right, why? He said, because it encourages you to be ignorant. It actually commands you to believe in things that are illogical or impossible. And that is evil because it's forcing lies on you. And you read it, you're like, oh, that's powerful. Like, I don't know how to refute that. Well, yeah, I do. Dawkins does have a point because he's basing it somewhat on his experience. He looks around and he sees some Christians just being like, science, no, right? And he's like, well, here's the deal. I kind of agree with him. There is this sort of rather uncomfortably large percentage of Christian people who would rather just sort of stick their fingers in there and go, like spoilers, whenever someone wants to present a scientific idea that might slightly make them uncomfortable or challenge some of their beliefs. And this has led to tension. This has led to people that I've spoken to in my own life who've said, Pete, Jesus seems cool and all, but man, you guys are just weird when it comes to science. I understand that that's your deal breaker. I do. If you're inspired by the words of Jesus, but you simply can't bring yourself to join a community of people who are so obstinate to reason and discovery and just look at the world, right? But as Brandon mentioned last week, and I'll say again, there are a lot of things that Christians do and don't do that I would ask you not to judge all of us on. The great news is you don't have to. This doesn't have to keep you from following Jesus. Any more than the fact that there are Christians who do dumb things, like we talked about last week, the fact that some Christians oppose science doesn't mean that you have to. It's not like you're signing this thing on the bottom line of like, yes, I will follow Jesus and I will deny science. Like, it doesn't work that way, right? Some of the greatest minds in history were men of science. And while rejecting science, hyper-fundamentalism exists in certain corners, don't confuse that with all of us. In fact, most Christians that I know and that I relate with interact and love science. They believe truth is truth, however it comes to us, and that science is a huge part of understanding God's world. That we believe that you don't have to and you shouldn't just shut your brain off. I love this proverb. This is the New Living Translation, Proverbs 14. Only simpletons believe everything they're told. You would think Richard Dawkins wrote that. That's in the Bible. The prudent carefully consider their steps. Like, I don't think God wants you to turn your brain off. Like, I don't think that's a thing. I don't think he's up there like, okay, you're ready to follow me, stop thinking. Why would he have given you a brain? I believe he created your brain. Why would I think he'd want you to not use it? That doesn't make any sense. In fact, like I mentioned, some of the greatest minds in the history of humanity were men of faith. I've read some interesting points on this. There's a good argument, and I'm not saying this is true. It's a good argument. Science itself, as you and I know it, came from Christianity and Islam, the two theistic religions, because those two religions believed that a wise, brilliant, intelligent creator ordered everything, and therefore we should study it. Early scientists like Isaac Newton, law of gravity, was deeply man of faith, who believed that God was calling him to study and look around in the world. And this sometimes created tension with other Christians. A great example is the famous astronomer Galileo, who was the first one to really say, I don't think the sun revolves around us. I think we revolve around the sun because I just put a telescope in the sky, and some of the Christians are like, no, the Bible says it, and they like put him under house arrest. But then he said this, I don't believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forgo their use. He was arguing against other Christians. Like this was a Christian argument. He's like, God gave us a brain, use it. Stop being closed-minded and silly. Now I realize in that context, Christians fighting, where that lands, and this is huge, is often on how we read and interpret the Bible. The fight that Galileo had with the Catholic Church was really around their interpretation of Scripture. And for a lot of people who struggle with science and Christianity, it often hits home in the pages of the Bible. So much so, unfortunately, we can't talk about that today. We're going to talk about it next week. So I'm going to come back next week, and I just want to talk about how does people of faith uphold the Scriptures appropriately and deal with scientific claims. But here, I just want to land on this place of saying, being a person who disagrees with science is not make you a better Christian, right? You are not holier because you deny science. That's silly. It's like, I only fly in planes, I don't drive cars. Wait, God gave you both. As a Christian, I want to be a person who looks at and studies and understands things. I can stand here and say, I believe in science. I believe in science and stuff. I do. I love science. I'm intrigued by it. One of my favorite classes I ever took in college was astronomy, and just sitting there studying the universe and how massive it was and crazy. It made me in awe of God. I remember the first time I just was in Colorado and saw these massive mountains, and I was driving through this canyon, and I was like, God is incredible, right? My scientific thoughts don't make me like, God isn't real. It's like, I'm just more amazed by him. I think we should embrace our God-given ability to explore and understand the world he created. Like the psalmist says in Psalm 111, he says this, great are the works of the Lord. They are studied by all who delight in them. We look at the universe, we're like, you are amazing, God, this is incredible. That's why science is not an alternative. It's not one or the other. This tension, this dichotomy, it's created by disingenuous people who are either confused or just lying. Or atheists on the one hand just have an agenda to try to disprove God. They can't, they never will. And then you have Christians who are just scared of it or something and don't want to talk about it. Neither of those things are good. That makes no sense to me. As people who believe in God, believing that he's responsible for nature, we should be the most enthused about studying it, about understanding, about exploring it. He created an astounding world and gave me an intelligent mind to think about it. And at the end of the day, listen, I stating this is just kind of a, science has never disproved God, and it never will, because God and science are different things. Science, the realm of science, doesn't speak into God's existence. Are there things from science that actually make me feel more confident that God is real? There are, actually. I'd love to talk to you about, the anthropic principle and other things about the order of our universe, but I'm not going to want to go there. I more just want to say, if you're sitting here this morning and you feel in your heart that science has always been a deal breaker, that you'd say, man, I want to follow Jesus, but I would just tell you this morning, don't let that keep you. It doesn't have to. It shouldn't. Psalm 19 says this, the heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they make him known. I love science and I love God. And I am completely happy intellectually to have both. And they're not in tension. They're not fighting each other. They're in harmony. So as Brandon said last week regarding hypocrisy in Christians and whether it should be a deal breaker, I would say with science, it's also what he called a trivial objection. Belief in science does not mean that you can't follow Jesus wholeheartedly. The two are not in conflict. You don't need to choose one or the other. Choose them both. Use your mind and your heart, right? Seek the Creator and seek to understand his creation. Why not? In doing so, may we actually continue to be more amazed by both. more willing to trust him and give him our lives as we see his brilliance displayed, as we study the nuances of the human genome, and we're like, God is incredible. Why wouldn't I give my life to him? Why wouldn't I trust my whole self over to a God who could make a flower do that, or make a galaxy 10 billion light years away do that? That's incredible. As I study God, it makes me want to follow him more. It makes me want to give more of my life to him. It makes me trust him more. Sometimes I sit in my room and I'm like, I don't know if God's going to come through. He makes stars. Come on, right? There's a billion galaxies and he knows all of them, and yet he knows your name. Why wouldn't you follow him? Why wouldn't you say, God, whatever you want, just tell me what to do it, because you're awesome. That's what science leads me to. That's what science makes me feel. Oh, there's no God because of science. No, God is amazing because of science. And I'm so excited to give my life to him every day, knowing that he will always come through for me. He knows more than me. He's more powerful than me. I see it in nature. So I'm not going to let that be an excuse to keep me from running hard after him. Will you stand with me? We're going to end this morning with a song just singing of God's glory, of his goodness, of reflecting on his nature and what he's done in the world, and believing that, man, as we do, we'll just fall more in love with him and want to follow him more. Let's sing together.